The storage alert came in at 11:48 p.m. I was standing in the hallway outside our bedroom in our apartment in Denver, barefoot, laptop balanced against one forearm, still half thinking it was just another sync error. I'd built the backup system myself a year earlier after Mia told me, for the third time, that her phone was basically full of nonsense, and handed it to me with that impatient look that meant, "Make it work, I don't care how." So when the dashboard flagged a sudden spike, I opened it automatically. One directory had expanded by tens of gigabytes in less than an hour. Recently deleted, archive. The name was plain enough that it almost calmed me. Almost. I clicked into it expecting duplicates, video dumps, some bloated app cache that had found its way into the wrong path. Instead, I saw image files. Hundreds of them. Time-stamped. Sorted. Preserved. I opened the first one. It was Mia. She was turned slightly toward the camera, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in a while. Not forced. Not tired. Easy. Familiar. Her hand rested against the chest of a man I recognized a second later, though I couldn't place from where at first. Then it came to me. I'd seen him once, maybe twice, in the background of a photo from one of her event weekends. A face I had registered and discarded. In that image, there was nothing to interpret. No room for optimism. No bad angle. No harmless explanation waiting behind better lighting. I closed the file. Then I closed the laptop. The hallway was quiet. The HVAC kicked on somewhere above me. From the bedroom, I could hear the low, even sound of Mia sleeping. I just stood there in the dark with the computer in my hand and understood something with a level of certainty I hadn't felt in years. Nothing was going back to the way it had been. Before that night, everything had a structure I understood. Mia's schedule looked busy, but it was consistent with the kind of work she said she was doing. Event agency, mid-level coordination, the kind of role where you're always between cities and never fully off the clock. Seattle one week, Austin the next, sometimes Phoenix. The flights lined up with industry calendars. The hotel names made sense. Nothing stood out because everything had just enough logic to it. I work in logistics. My job is to take moving parts and reduce them into something predictable. Systems, timelines, failure points. If something doesn't fit, it usually shows up early. But with her, I didn't run that process. At home, things were easy. Bills were split cleanly. We used a shared account for rent, utilities, groceries. I tracked it the same way I tracked everything else, quietly, without making a point of it. We talked about upgrades, maybe a house outside the city in a year or two. She liked the idea of more space. I liked the idea of stability. She never wanted to deal with anything technical. That part was consistent too. When her phone lagged, she handed it to me. When an app broke, she didn't troubleshoot. She delegated. That's how the backup system started. Not out of suspicion, just efficiency. Just make sure I don't lose anything, she told me once, already halfway out the door. So I did. Looking back, there were small things. Not dramatic. Just deviations. She started using the word client more often, but without specifics. Her trips extended by a day here, a night there. Flights that didn't quite match the original itinerary. When I asked, she had answers. Not detailed, but smooth enough to move past. Her tone shifted too, gradually. Less sharing, more summarizing. Conversations became headlines instead of stories. Busy weekend. Good event. Exhausted. I accepted it because it fit the surface pattern of someone stretched thin. Even the late nights didn't register the way they should have. Event work runs late. That was always the explanation, and it wasn't wrong. Just incomplete. If I noticed a delay in a response, I filled in the gap myself. If something felt slightly off, I adjusted around it instead of stopping to examine it. There was no single moment before that night that forced a reevaluation. Just a series of small allowances I made without documenting them. And that was the difference. At work, I track everything. At home, I trusted the summary. That night, I didn't go back into the folder. The laptop stayed closed on the kitchen counter. I didn't scroll. I didn't check timestamps. I didn't open a second file to confirm what I had already seen. One image was enough to establish a baseline, and I didn't trust myself yet to move beyond that without turning it into something reactive. Instead, I went to bed. Mia was already asleep, facing away from my side. The room was dark except for the dim light from the street filtering through the blinds. I lay down without making noise, the same way I always did when she had an early flight or a long day behind her. Nothing in her posture suggested anything unusual, slow breathing, no tension in her shoulders, one arm tucked under the pillow. It was a normal night from the outside, but the structure had changed. I kept my eyes open longer than usual, letting the details settle into something stable. Not the emotional side of it. That was there, but I set it aside. What mattered was what I could confirm. A file exists. Inside that file is an image. In that image, Mia is with a man I recognize. That's not interpretation. That's not assumption. That's a fixed point. Then there was the folder itself. Recently deleted, archive. That name wasn't automatic. It wasn't something the system would generate on its own in that format. It implied repetition. A process. Files being removed, but not erased. Moved. Stored. Accumulated over time. Which meant this wasn't a single incident. It was maintenance. I ran through the timeline in my head, not emotionally, but structurally. The system I set up synced across devices, mirrored deletions, preserved versions. If something had been removed from her phone, it didn't disappear. It just changed location. And I hadn't been looking. 9 months. That number came from the oldest timestamp I had glimpsed before closing the screen. I didn't verify it yet, but it stayed with me as a working estimate. 9 months of activity is not noise. It's a pattern. I turned slightly onto my side, facing the ceiling now, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing beside me. Everything else, every explanation, every assumption, every benefit of the doubt I had given over the past year, no longer had weight until it could be verified against that pattern. I didn't need to confront anything. Not yet. First, I needed to replace the story I had been given with something measurable. And for the first time, I understood that the truth wasn't going to come from what she said. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. It was already sitting in a directory I hadn't opened. The next morning followed its usual sequence. I woke up at 6:10, a few minutes before the alarm. Lay still for a moment, listening. Same as every weekday. Mia shifted once beside me, then settled again. I got up without turning on the overhead light and went to the kitchen. Coffee first. Always the same ratio, same timing. I measured it out without thinking, letting the routine carry the motion. It helped keep everything contained, reduced the chance of drifting into something unstructured. By the time she came out, I was already halfway through my first cup, standing near the window, looking down at the parking lot. Morning, she said, voice still soft from sleep. Morning. She moved through the kitchen the way she always did, opening cabinets without fully looking, pulling out what she needed by memory. There was no hesitation, no visible shift in her behavior. If anything, she seemed more relaxed than she had been in weeks. She started talking about a new project. Something in Austin. A larger client this time, more coordination, tighter deadlines. The kind of thing that would justify longer trips, later nights. I listened. Not actively, not passively. Just enough to register the structure of what she was saying. Locations. Dates. General scope. No specifics I could anchor to anything verifiable yet. Under normal circumstances, I would have asked to follow up. Something small. A detail to fill in the outline. I didn't. Instead, I let the information sit as it was, unconfirmed input. The decision had already been made the night before, standing in that hallway with the laptop in my hand. I wasn't going to ask her anything. Not because I didn't want answers. Because I didn't trust the format of the answers I would get. Questions invite narratives. Narratives can be adjusted, refined, delivered in a way that sounds complete without actually being complete. Data doesn't do that. She finished her coffee, checked her phone, mentioned something about needing to leave early next week. I nodded where it made sense, responded where it was necessary. From the outside, nothing had changed. But internally, the framework was different. I wasn't participating in the version of events she was presenting anymore. I was observing it. There's a difference between listening to understand and listening to record. That morning, I shifted fully into the second. I left for work at the usual time. Same route, same traffic patterns, same stops. But instead of thinking about the day ahead, I was organizing the first steps. Access the archive. Isolate the timeline. Cross-reference with known trips. Check financial overlap. No confrontation. No assumptions. Just a full reconstruction of what had actually been happening. By the time I parked, the plan was clear. I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was preparing to see it exactly as it was. I opened the archive the next night. Not immediately. I waited until the apartment settled into its usual pattern. Lights off, her asleep, the quiet stretch where nothing interrupts. I set the laptop on the kitchen table, connected to the local server directly, and pulled up the directory again. Recently deleted, archive. This time, I went in without hesitation. 1,100 files. The number alone confirmed what I had already assumed. This wasn't incidental. It was sustained. I switched the view to detailed list, sorted by date, oldest to newest. The earliest file went back just over 9 months. I didn't open everything at once. I started with structure. First, I exported the file list, names, timestamps, metadata, into a separate sheet. Then I created columns, date, time, file type, embedded location data, if available. I wasn't interested in reacting to what I saw. I was building a framework I could move through without losing consistency. Then I began. Images first. Over 200 that included the same man. Different cities, different settings. Restaurants, hotel rooms, parking structures, outdoor shots near venues I recognized from her work calendar. None of it hidden well enough to avoid correlation. In fact, most of it aligned too cleanly. I marked each one. Date matched to trip. Location matched to declared itinerary. Time matched to gaps in communication I had already experienced but never documented. Patterns started forming within the first hour. 5 separate trips, Seattle, Austin, Phoenix, 2 in Denver itself, lined up directly with clusters of images involving him. Not random overlap. Consistent pairing. I didn't linger on the content of the photos. That wasn't useful. What mattered was frequency, timing, repetition. Next, I moved to coordinates. Some files had embedded GPS data. Not all, but enough. I extracted what I could, dropped them into a map overlay, and compared them against known hotel addresses and event venues she had mentioned over the past year. Matches. Not approximate. Exact. From there, I shifted to finances. Our joint account was straightforward. Rent, utilities, shared expenses. But once I aligned transaction dates with the trip timeline, additional charges surfaced. Restaurants that didn't match her reported schedule. Ride services at hours that extended beyond event closures. Then I found the gaps. Transactions that should have been there, but weren't. Which pointed to another source. I went back through the system logs, looking for connected accounts, backup anomalies, anything that suggested parallel financial activity. That's when I saw it. A secondary account linked once, briefly, then removed. No active sync now, but traces remained in the logs. Partial identifiers. Enough to confirm it existed. I noted it. Didn't pursue it yet. By 2:30 a.m., the outline was clear. This wasn't a series of isolated decisions. It was a parallel structure running alongside everything I thought we had. And for the first time, I wasn't filling in gaps with assumptions. I was removing them. At a certain point, it stopped being about what I saw and started being about what I could prove. Photos establish presence. They confirm overlap, but they don't define scope. They don't show intent, and they don't quantify anything beyond the moment they capture. Money does. I went back through everything I had already logged and shifted the focus. Dates stayed the same. Locations stayed the same. But now I was layering transactions over the timeline, looking for alignment, inconsistencies, and gaps that suggested parallel activity. The joint account gave me a baseline. $3,000 over 9 months that didn't match anything we had discussed. Restaurants in cities where she claimed tight schedules. Midday charges during conference blocks. Ride services that started and ended far from any listed venue. Individually, none of it would stand out. Together, it formed a secondary pattern. Still incomplete, which meant there was another source. I contacted a lawyer first. Not in Denver. Dallas. Different jurisdiction, less overlap, cleaner separation. I didn't give him a story. Just a summary of what I had. Shared finances, undisclosed activity, documented inconsistencies. He didn't ask about photos. He asked about accounts. What can you tie directly to her, he said. Not enough yet, I told him. Then don't move early. That was the only advice I needed. The next step was a private investigator. Not for surveillance. That part was already done, unintentionally, over months of stored data. I needed someone who understood financial tracing, someone who worked backward from gaps instead of forward from assumptions. He wasn't interested in the images either. Photos are noise, he said. People argue around them. He focused on the missing pieces. Within 2 weeks, he found the second account. Separate bank, separate card, opened under her name, but never linked to anything we shared. It didn't show up in standard polls because there was no direct connection, no transfers between accounts, no overlapping billing addresses that would trigger flags. It was clean, deliberately so. Transactions lined up where mine ended. Where our joint card stopped, hers continued. Same cities, same dates, different funding source. Hotels that never appeared in our records. Charges that filled in the exact gaps I had marked earlier. It wasn't just overlap anymore. It was continuity. A complete parallel structure running alongside ours, designed to operate without detection unless someone was looking at both sides at once. I didn't feel anything when I saw it. Not surprise, not anger, just confirmation. The system held. And once it was fully mapped, there was nothing left to interpret. Only decisions to execute. She called the same afternoon the papers were served. I saw the first call come through while I was at my desk. I let it ring out. Then another. Then a third. By the fifth, the pattern was clear. No spacing, no pause to think, just repetition. I didn't answer any of them. The messages started a few minutes later. What is this? This has to be a mistake. Call me. I read each one once, then set the phone face down and went back to what I was doing. There wasn't anything in those messages I needed to respond to. Not yet. Not in that format. By the time I left work, there were 12 missed calls. She was outside my new apartment when I got back. I had moved 3 days earlier. Not far, still within the same part of the city, but enough to separate routines. New lease, new access, everything transferred cleanly. She hadn't been there before. She was standing near the entrance, phone in her hand, looking up every time a car pulled in. When she saw mine, she stepped forward immediately. "Can we talk?" she said. I didn't answer. I parked, shut the engine off, and sat there for a moment, letting the sequence stay controlled. Then I got out and walked past her toward the building. "This doesn't make sense," she said, keeping pace beside me. "There's something wrong with this. You didn't even." I unlocked the main door and went inside. She followed. In the hallway, her voice dropped. Less urgency, more focus. "I can explain everything," she said. That was the first time she used that phrasing. Not denial, not confusion, explanation. I reached my door, unlocked it, stepped in, and closed it behind me before she could move any closer. She knocked once, then again louder. "Just talk to me," she said through the door. "You're overreacting. Whatever you think you saw, it's not." I stood there, a few feet inside, listening. There was no need to interrupt. No need to correct anything. Everything she was saying depended on me engaging with it, asking questions, giving her space to shape the narrative, adjusted in real time. I wasn't going to do that. The documents had already been filed. The timelines established. The accounts identified. There was nothing she could add that would change the structure. Her voice shifted again, softer now. "Please," she said. "We can fix this." I stayed where I was. No movement. No response. After a while, the knocking stopped. Her footsteps moved back down the hallway, slower this time. I waited until I heard the main door close before I moved at all. Then I locked the deadbolt, set my phone on the counter, and went back to finishing what I had already started. After that, the process moved without me. There were filings, responses, revisions, structured steps that followed their own timeline once initiated. I didn't need to push anything forward. I just responded when required, through the attorney, with what had already been documented. Her side changed position within the first week. At the start, the language was broad. General denial. Requests for clarification. Standard posture when there's still room to reshape the narrative. But that only works when the other side is operating on statements. I wasn't. Everything I had submitted was time-stamped, cross-referenced, and anchored to independent sources. Locations pulled from metadata. Transactions aligned with account records. Travel dates matched against confirmations she had forwarded months earlier without thinking they would ever be revisited. Individually, each piece was small. Together, they formed a closed system. Her attorney requested additional time, then narrowed their response. Certain claims were withdrawn quietly, without explanation. Others were reduced to procedural points, technicalities that didn't affect the core structure. I didn't interpret any of it emotionally. Adjustments like that aren't personal. They're mathematical. When variables stop supporting a position, they get removed. The private investigator sent over a final report near the end of the second week. Clean formatting. No commentary. Just sequences, account activity, linked identifiers, verified expenditures. The second account filled every gap. There were no unexplained intervals left. Every trip, every extension, every discrepancy I had logged earlier now had a corresponding financial trail. Hotels that never touched our joint card. Transportation booked independently. Charges that ran parallel to the ones I had already identified, never intersecting but always aligned. Two systems. One visible, one concealed, running at the same time. Once that report was added to the file, the conversation on the other side shifted again. Less resistance. More compliance. Requests became acknowledgments. Positions softened without being stated directly. The language changed from argument to resolution. I didn't need to attend any in-person meetings. Everything was handled through documentation. Signatures, confirmations, final terms. There was no moment where everything was revealed. It had already been. What changed was how it was recognized. By the end, there was nothing left that required interpretation. Only agreement on what the numbers already showed. And numbers don't negotiate. When it ended, there wasn't a clear marker. No final call. No meeting across a table. No moment where someone said it was done and waited for a reaction. The last document came through as a standard notification, signed, processed, filed. I reviewed it once, confirmed the terms matched what had already been agreed to, and sent it back. That was it. I was at work when the confirmation arrived. Middle of the afternoon. Same desk, same screens, same set of tasks I had been moving through all day. I didn't stop what I was doing. Finished the sequence I was in, logged the update, and moved on to the next item. There wasn't anything to process in the way people expect. No sense of winning. No sense of loss. Just completion. On the drive home, traffic moved the same as it always did. Slow near the exits, clear once it opened up past the industrial stretch. I kept the radio off. Not intentionally. Just didn't think to turn it on. The apartment was quiet when I walked in. Different layout than before. Less in it. Only what I had chosen to bring over. No shared items. No overlap. Everything had a place because I had put it there. I set my keys on the counter, changed, and started making dinner. Same routine as always. Measured, consistent. Heat, timing, sequence. It didn't require attention beyond what I gave it, which left space for everything else to settle without interference. There were no calls, no messages, nothing waiting to be addressed. Whatever needed to be said had already been documented in a format that didn't rely on tone or delivery. It existed independently of either of us now, stored, finalized, and closed. I ate at the table, not in front of a screen. Finished, cleaned up, reset the kitchen the same way I always had. From the outside, it would have looked like any other evening. And in most ways, it was. The only difference was structural. There was no longer anything running in parallel. No second layer. No missing variables. No need to cross-reference one version of events against another. Everything that remained was singular, contained, and fully accounted for. I didn't prove anything. I didn't need to. I just stepped out of something that had already been operating without me for months. And once I was out, there was nothing left to manage. I took the server with me when I moved. Not because I needed what was on it. That part had already served its purpose. But systems don't get abandoned just because the situation changes. They get rebuilt. I wiped the unnecessary directories, archived what needed to be retained, reconfigured the sync intervals, cleaned up redundancies, tightened the structure. Now it runs every 4 hours. Quietly, consistently, the way it should have from the beginning. There's no one else connected to it now. No shared access. No mirrored devices. Just a closed loop that does exactly what it's designed to do. Sometimes I think about how little it took to understand everything. One alert. One directory. One file. Not a conversation. Not an argument. Not a long sequence of events stretching out until something finally breaks. Just a single point of clarity that made everything else fall into place once I chose to look at it directly. I didn't miss signs because they weren't there. I missed them because I wasn't measuring them. That part is on me. But once the structure was visible, there was no confusion left to manage. Just steps, execution, separation. Now, everything runs on a system I can see. And if something changes, it won't sit unnoticed in the background. It'll show up where it's supposed to. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.